Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And today we have a guest joining us all the way from Alaska. Alaskan grown, as she likes to say, she has a passion for creating worlds and is handy when one lives in a uniquely beautiful place such as her home state. She started writing in middle school with a good old-fashioned pencil and paper, jotting down ideas for characters, adventures, and different worlds. In her 30s, with the encouragement of her husband, she began writing and writing until she finally created her first trilogy. And after the birth of her two daughters and work, she finally had to find quiet time, 5 a.m. mornings and secluded nights after bedtime to express her ideas. And her greatest wish is to write her stories and to have others read and enjoy them, and to tell us all about her upcoming series. Let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, Alaskan author J.E. Larson. Larson, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Awesome. So, Larson, before we dive into your series, is there anything else you'd like to share about your background as a writer and author? Anything that wasn't covered in the introduction?
I think you did get it all. That was pretty much me in a nutshell. Just writing has become it was a passion for me all my life. And it's finally in this time in my life that I've been able to do it and felt confident enough to have it go out there. So that's why we're here.
Awesome. So now, for people who are just learning about you for the very first time, what can you give us as a little teaser and introduction to your first trilogy that you're working on?
So it's actually the Valdor series is 4 books. The trilogy that I refer to in my bio is one that's not published, and I'm it needs a rewrite
Okay.
on. So the Valdor series, I've got it right here. Here's the book one.
Ooh.
It is a 4-book series. The first 2 are out now. This is book 1, and we've got book 2 here that was published in November. The third one's probably going to come out this summer. I'm really excited about it. And it's a fantasy romance series that follows a Spitfire main female character who embarks on deadly trials to save her dying world. So it's got a lot of adventure, romance, everything you kind of want in a traditional romantasy book.
Nice. I love it. And can you show up the book covers again? I just got to make a comment because those are beautiful, beautiful covers. And we are going to talk a little about, the creation of the book because, oh my gosh, that is just so beautiful, so elegant. I absolutely just love it, Larson. I mean, I can tell that you really, really enjoy creating this world.
Well, even when you have like the spines will start to align with book 3, it'll have 2 of the stars filled in, and then book 4, all 4 of the stars are filled in. Like there's just little things.
Oh, that is so clever. That is really clever, Larson. I have never thought of it. That is actually really cool. So before we dive into this series and of course mention your upcoming series that you're working on, let's actually go back in time a little bit to your childhood growing up. So were you a very creative kid growing up in Alaska? Were you always writing, jotting down stuff? I know in your bio you began this journey at a young age, but did that come about from like a family friend, a family member? Can you walk us through how you became the person you are now?
So I've always just had ideas and different stories, like spin-off stories in my mind. And then I remember trying to write my first one when I was, I think, in middle school. And that was, stories about friendship and things like that, and just kind of building characters along with that. And just always you could find me outside doing things. And it's from there that playing outdoors, just being active, my imagination was able to flourish and thrive. So when you understand that and you read my books, you kind of have a understanding of this person really knows what they're doing out being outdoors, although we all read and write books inside, but like you were able to see the connection of nature and just being able to visualize where these characters are and how these worlds are forming and taking place. And I relate that a lot to my childhood growing up, living in a beautiful state of Alaska, and really diving into that and embracing that as much as I can.
Awesome. I would have to agree because, we see a lot of, pictures and, documentaries of Alaska. I mean, it is truly like the last bastion of, like, it's so different from all the other states in the U.S. It has its own uniqueness, its own beauty to it. And yes, to your point, it is like a creative hub to like create new worlds, to dive into the unknown. So speaking on that topic of the unknown, what would you consider your aha moment when you realized that you wanted to pursue this passion of writing for yours and actually take the first step to publish the first book in your series?
I had a story that I just needed to share, needed to get out. The first trilogy that I wrote, which is not published, it needs a rewrite, like I've said. I wrote that one and really understood my writing process and
Mm.
learned a lot of different things to avoid and also things to really do and to lean on for my strengths. From the end of that story, the idea of the Valdor series came about, and I was able to really build this world. And I took a really interesting approach with this, and I wrote my villains first for this Valdor series.
Oh.
And that is coming into play in book 3, which I'm really excited for coming up. And just kind of seeing it all come to fruition is pretty amazing to see. And, you just had a story that I just had to share it. And I said, this is the one that I want to push out. This is the one that needs to be shared, and have everyone else read it along with me.
Awesome. So now let's actually talk about the creation of the first book in the Valdor series. So walk me through this. So you are in front of your computer, or maybe you have a notepad and pencil, and you're beginning to jot down the first few lines of this amazing series. What were your initial goals for yourself as the author, as well as the promises you were making to your future readers for this series?
I knew what the story was going to do beginning to end before I started writing it and publishing it. I know if some people write their stories and they don't know where it's going to go. I always knew where my major plot lines or twists were going to happen and what was going to be occurring throughout the series. So that was really nice to have in mind. And then, as you're writing it, you have different twists or turns, or your characters develop lives of their own, and they add different aspects to the story as well that only strengthen it and make it a lot better.
Nice. That's actually really, really incredible. And honestly, what I'm always very fascinated when it comes to, like, authors writing their first book is that, we have this idea and we want to get it down on paper. And then to go forward into like creating a series, I mean, that is like, how do you expand on the lore? I mean, you would think everything's put into the first book, but then you get feedback from friends and family. It's like, you got to keep doing this. You got to keep writing. You got to keep expanding. Was that kind of like the reaction from friends and family who learned that you were writing this series?
No one really knew outside of my really close friends or family that I was writing or I liked to write. It was something I kind of kept close to my chest.
Okay.
And then when they read the first book, I had so many people. Because I was a volleyball player in college, like kind of the traditional jock, as you could say, but also my head in books because I was a science major in college as well. It was people were saying, I can't believe you wrote this. I don't believe like you wrote such a beautiful story. And they're like, I would have never imagined this coming from you, which is really amazing to hear at the same time. But it's also like, this is something that I'm really proud to do and to share with everyone. And everyone kind of knows me. If I didn't think it was good, it would not be published. But just kind of going from that and knowing when I wrote I originally thought this was going to be a 3-book series instead of 4, but I wrote the first one and then I wasn't counting the words or anything like that. And I realized it was over 200,000 words. And I was like, this is a 4-book series. This is big. This is bigger than I even thought it was going to be. And I'm really happy with where I ended the first book, but that's not where it originally was supposed to end. But I'm pleasantly, like, I'm pleased with where I did end it because it leads really well into the second book.
That's amazing. And oh my gosh. So you're telling me that when you drafted the first story, it was literally 4 books into one, and then you realize, this is gonna have to be cut down into like individual stuff because there's no way the average reader is gonna read like that many books. Well, unless you're a fan of like Tolkien or Martin or like those big books. But yeah, that's incredible. So okay, so once you made the decision to split this massive novel into 4 separate novels, What was the feedback like to now going to the direction of publishing from like beta readers and ARC readers? Was the response positive, very critical, or somewhere down the middle?
Oh, it was great because I didn't even have like traditional beta readers until I just finished the manuscript for the third book of the series, and I had an actual beta reader for it. I haven't had that.
Okay.
I didn't had that before. I just had a couple of really good friends who loved reading and said, "Here, what do you think about this?" And that was the route that I took, which is I'm like, that's kind of like a beta reader, right? Like you pay someone for copy line editing, you just pay like your friends were like, "Give me the brutal, honest truth, but also kind of be nice."
Oh yeah, that the many struggles and hustles of an author trying to get, readers to review the books, give us feedback, and yes, as like our friends and families, like I want you to like this, but don't sugarcoat it when some parts don't make sense. Like give me the honesty. And speaking of, this direction, let's actually talk about the artwork, the creation of the cover, because that I always find to be very fascinating because the cover has to match the book because that is the one thing that's going to grab the reader's attention. So can you walk us through how you came about the creation of the cover?
So I have a cover artist based in the UK. Her name is Sherry Fox, and I found her through Fiverr. And I know that's
Oh,
always
okay.
like the be careful of this, because you get people on there saying I can make a cover for you for $10, and I was like, I'm not going to go fishing through those because it's not the quality of book that I'm looking
Mhm.
to put out, because I could do a $10 cover. Trust me, I can do that. So I reached out, I saw her Instagram, I saw her website, and then I messaged her and I said, "Hey, I'm doing a 4-book fantasy romance series and I need all the covers to go through. So I'm looking for a cover artist to do all 4 of my covers. And I'm looking for maybe some character art, which she ended up doing for me. But I kind of gave her the synopsis, like a little bit of a breakdown of the books, and kind of just told her like she knows what happens in actually all of the books versus like anyone else. She had to know like beginning, big plot twist, big end. And then she was like messaged me back and she was like, "I'm on board. We have to do this." And I sent her like pictures of me hiking in the mountains and the woods in Alaska. And that's kind of what came about for the cover of this first book. This is called A Trial of Fate. And in the Valdor series, all of the books start with the title, A Trial of, and then the last
Mhm.
word in the book kind of gives you a hint of what it's spinning around or what the main concept is around this. But for this cover, it was from a picture when I was in Juneau, Alaska, actually, and I took a picture
Oh,
on a hiking trail. And this picture kind of came about of the forest and just kind of walking on a trail. And she was like, "I want your main character to be in the middle of the forest on a trail, looking over her shoulder, being powerful." So that's kind of what we did for that. And all the covers are going to have my main female character on the cover, with maybe a slight twist on the fourth one that I can't just reveal yet. She's still working on the fourth cover.
of course, absolutely. That is amazing. And I'm glad you're able to find someone that shares the same vision for your story because, just like with like an editor and an artist, you want someone that's going to be very professional and also have like clear guidelines, but also be open to, collaboration in the sense like, I get it, I'm the artist, I think I know what I'm doing, but you are the author. I want you to tell me what you think because I'm sure you've met other author friends on social media or in your own writing circle who have probably had like not so good experiences. And we'll touch on that in the business portion of the interview. So, with all that said, Larson, do you think that your promises and your goals have been validated from the response of like when you first published your first book and the next ones in the series?
Uh, yes, I believe so. The feedback from all of the readers has been really good. Some people don't like certain types of writing, and that's okay. As an author, you have to realize like what you are and what you have. I'm a very descriptive writing author, and there are some people who don't like that. They're like, I just want to get to the business and be done. And I was like, that is totally fine. You might not like my book then, but that's okay. But you have to just know that there's a wide variety of readers out there, and you just have to find the ones that will really respond to your work.
Absolutely. And also, I just love the fact that you say you're a very descriptive writer, because I know the struggles as well. I am also a very descriptive writer. I'm a very cinematic in terms of like how I lay out the land. I like to say, okay, this person has this background. This is what the world is. I break down every little detail. And I have to agree, some people are like, this is really good, but I want to get to like the action. I want to get to like the conflict. And that is completely fine. Everyone has their own different styles of reading, some different styles of writing, and so forth. And this kind of leads to this discussion of, vulnerability when it comes to showcasing our work to complete strangers, because there is a sense of nervousness and hesitancy to present an aspect of who we are to the unknown. And especially as authors, that's heightened to the 10th degree, because with social media, it's a huge benefit for us to showcase our work to a wide multitude of different readers, to build that rapport with our audience, to build our brand. But on the other side of the coin, we do expose ourselves to, trolls, spam, every negative thing. And of course, imposter syndrome's always in the background saying that you shouldn't do this. Why are you writing this? No one's going to read a book like this, and so forth. And it can make us question, are we doing the right thing? Or should we put in this amount of work into something that may not see the light of day? So I'm curious, Larson, when you began this journey of yours, did you have that sense of like, anxiety and imposter syndrome when your first book got published? And if so, or if not, what has disciplined you to continue with the Valdor series, as well as work on your next trilogy that's completely separate?
You have to believe in the story. If you don't believe in your story 100%, like it's really good, then there's no point in starting it, because you're going to get some negative reviews, and you're going to get ones that hurt. But you have to realize it's not a personal attack, even though our writing is so personal to us, because you pour your heart and soul into your writing. You have to make sure that you have your shields on, you have to have your shields up, and to really protect yourself, knowing that you're being vulnerable in your writing. And that's a part of the beauty of it. If you aren't vulnerable in your writing and you're not speaking to true experiences, then it diminishes the work. You have to be willing to dive in and do that. And part of that vulnerability is understanding that not everyone in the world who reads it is going to accept it, but you accept it at your core. And that's going to be the beautiful thing that comes from this.
Beautifully said, Larson. Absolutely beautifully said. And that now leads into the business portion of the author interview, which I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on. So, just to correct me if I'm wrong, Larson, did you go down the path of an indie author? And if so, what have you learned on this journey of being an independent author?
Yes, I did. Of course, I still have some queries out to literary agents, because let's be honest, if someone were to take all this social media stuff and promotion things over off your hands, and you're like, I can just write, we'd all be so happy. But I do love the fact of being an indie author, that I personally reach out and I make those connections with my readers, because it's really cool to get that feedback from them. Learning from an indie author perspective is to, first off, it is important to have like somewhat of a social media presence. I did this the hard way. I had no social media whatsoever when I was like, I want to publish a book. Sure, I'll start it like maybe 4 months before it comes out. And it was tough. I had to spend and dedicate a good chunk of time to like people reaching out to people's DMs, like, hey, this is a cool book, you should read it. Yay. And trying to figure out my pitch lines and things like that, and reaching out to book talkers and bookstagrammers and say, like, someone just please read this book. It's amazing. You need to read it. And I first found my first reader was someone I met through Book Talk, Zalima, who lives in Texas. And she was like, I'll read your book. I was like, thank God, someone's gonna read my book. and and she read it and she was like, oh my gosh, this is a 5-star book. Why is no one talking about this? I'm like, because no one knows I exist. It's okay, we'll get there. And then I met someone, my friend Chris, she runs Ink Pages. She's the one who did a special edition of my book through her company. I remember following her, like, she's got like all the recs that I love. I think she will love to read my book, but it's just waiting, it's being patient and getting people to read your book. And then she read it and she's like, I reached out to her before I knew she was starting a special edition company. And then she reached out to me and said, oh my God, we need to do your book, by the way, because I want people to read your book. And so I partnered with her in collaboration and she did a special edition release of my book as well. And that was kind of the stepping stone for me to really like have people hear about my book and someone being like, oh, it's good enough to maybe have someone make a special edition of it. And it really helped kind of launch it. And then I've been working with Inkspire, which is a author promotion company. And they've been helping out a lot. They have, 2,000 followers that are book people, not like the bots or the people you have no idea who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And they've, 2,000 readers. I'm like, God, that'd be amazing if even like half of them read the book. So I've been partnering up with them and they've been helping with my social media a little bit. And they're going to be running like a book tour for me for book 3. I've hired them to do that. So I've saved and kind of budgeted my allowances to do that. Instead of doing an audiobook, I've paid to do that instead. So that's my goals of going through for this.
Absolutely. And you know what? You touched on some of the most important things about being an indie author is the fact that it's all on our own. Yes, as indie authors, we have the sole creative control and ownership of our works, but
it's a lot. Oh my God. Do you realize how stressful it is to pick out a font?
this is the truth, ladies and gentlemen. This is the struggle and hustle of being indie authors, and this actually kind of segues now into the next question. So, Larson, as you mentioned earlier, that you've already sent out query letters to other publishing houses. Now, this is I find to be a very interesting question because I always like to hear my guests' response to this. Now, when it comes to like an author's first book, they always have a particular path that they go on. So for the Valdor series, looking back on it, do you think that the Valdor series worked best going the independent route as opposed to, let's say, if you went to a hybrid publisher or a small indie publisher? Because sometimes, from some of my guests who I've interviewed, they have said, this book for me worked best in this publishing range, but that's not to say that I won't try other publishing avenues for other stories.
It's kind of going as it is. If it gets picked, like I've been querying literary agents, not just publishers, and kind of going at it from that angle. I've devoted a lot of my time to being the indie author publisher of this, and I'm just kind of going with it. I mean, it could get picked up, it could not, or I'm just like, it is, and it's out there for people to love and enjoy. And especially with my being an Alaskan, like I just had a book signing yesterday.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. I sold over 35 copies in the 2 hours I was there at like a fireside bookstore in Palmer, Alaska. And the overwhelming support I have from Alaskans is tremendous. We support our own up here, but it's not only support, they're buying the first book, they're buying the second book because they're enjoying it. So it's really nice to see. And I always measured my success would be if I evened out with my editing and cover artist costs and everything. If I evened out or even made like a couple $100 extra, I would consider it a win because this is definitely a passion project that I've been trying to do.
Absolutely. And I definitely think, especially for, first-time authors getting started in this industry, we all want to go the, traditional publishing to the big houses, Tor, Forge, Macmillan, Penguin Random House, etc. But there is this gatekeeper mentality from these big publishing houses that make it very hard for authors like ourselves to go into the publishing industry. And yes, from one perspective, I can understand why, because for them, it is a business. They have to consider, is this book going to generate, capital for us? Are we going to make money back if we promote like this book everywhere. So from that perspective, I get it. However, it is still very difficult and very hard. That's why I always like to say to look into small indie publishing houses, because they have a great track record. They have already an established audience, and sometimes they've been there longer than the big publishing houses. So you never want to sell yourself short. And going forward from this, the next thing I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on, Larson, is understanding one's audience, because as authors, we're the target audience first and foremost. We know the story better than anyone else. And from what you've told me about the Valdor series, you know it just off the back of your hand. And you should, because you are the author. You know how the story is going to end and what's going to happen. You know all the arcs, all of the branching stuff, and so forth. However, when it comes to publishing it and understanding, okay, this book is going to fall in this genre, it's going to target this audience, that's when the business marketing mindset comes in. The most daunting and most intimidating part about being an author. So
Oh,
this
you're
leads,
telling me.
yes. So this leads to a two-part question. The first part is, for you, do you have a good idea of your audience going into the continued books in the Valdor series, as well as your separate trilogy? And in your opinion, when should an author consider its audience?
So this is something I didn't really research much on. And before I started writing, I just kind of wrote the story as what I wanted to do, which is kind of freeing. I didn't know it was a slow burn romance until my editor was like, hey, it's good. And I was like, I just thought they were getting to know each other. I don't know. Or like learning all the different tropes and things that, Book Talk has given us. But knowing my audience, I just figured it was someone who liked and enjoyed the books that I liked to read, reading from early on stories such as Aragon and, of course, A Court of Thorns and Roses books, anything mass, getting into other types of fantasy as I look behind on my bookshelf, like From Blood and Ash, even a little bit of Outlander, like all of those different things. Like anyone who likes that genre of reading, would get into this. And I think the fantasy romance genre is actually having a rebirth for people to express that it's okay to read those stories, and it's really fun and exciting. And a lot of women, my age, in their 30s, early 20s and older, are enjoying reading again. It's a pastime that's highly thought of. Like, you read books, that's amazing. It helps expand our mindset and our growth, and I think those are the readers that we look to. When someone's writing a new book, you're writing it for yourself mainly, honestly. Like authors, that's why we're writing a book. We
Mm-hmm.
enjoy it, we want to do it. So looking at yourself as a reader and finding that niche is a good way to promote and market it.
Absolutely. And when, in your opinion, should an author consider their audience? Because some authors that I've interviewed have different answers to this question. Some authors say that, they should consider the audience before they begin writing the book. Other times it's after the draft is finished and it's in the publishing stage. So for you, where do you see yourself?
I see myself as maybe afterwise a little bit, because the you want to be careful with your readers and writing towards your audience,
Mm-hmm.
so it doesn't overshadow what you want to do as the author with the story. I've had feedback from two of my ARC readers for the second book where they were talking about one of the side characters they thought was going to swoop in and be a main character, and I said, no, he's gay. You don't know. I was like, that's totally wrong. You have no idea where this thing is going to us. But it's also being mindful of being careful of like I said, every reader's different. And sometimes people can like a book and then it changes, but you have to be true to yourself as an author of where you want the story to go.
That's 100% true, because yes, we do want to target to our audience, but we also have to understand, well, the audience may think this, but in actuality, this is how the story is going to go. And you know what? You're absolutely right. Every reader is going to have their own differing opinions of where they think the story is going to go. And that leads into the readership, which I always find to be a very interesting subject because, yes, the audience is important. Within the audience, you have the readership because it's those individual people who are going to pick up the story and read it, share it, promote it, and help build the author's brand. So, for the Valdor series, Larson, where would you say it falls under young adult, new adult, or adult fiction? And whichever age bracket it is, did you find a difficulty in the sense of writing for that particular readership?
Oh, it's adult or new adult, not young adult. Nope, there's spicy open door scenes. Do not let a young one read this. I I've written before with young adult in mind, but for me, I always like the adult romance. I think for me, this is just me as a reader. I don't enjoy young adult stories as much as I do adult because I don't feel like there's depth to that. And that's just me as a reader personally. Like,
Mhm.
they can be a fantastic story, but that's just me and what I want to do. So I want to make sure that I stick true to what I do. And in writing the Valdor series, I wanted to make it more adult because they have those deeper connections in those relationships. Even when it goes into a physical relationship within the characters, I wanted to make sure that that was in there to make a full romance story within the fantasy world.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right because, I've talked with a lot of authors on this when it comes to like the readership, and they've always said when it comes to like for YA, as you say, your books are not YA. There are some YA novels that are supposed to be YA, but upon reading them, it's like this is new adult or adult fiction. And that comes with, understanding the author, how they approach stories, and also the kind of stories they are writing. And that comes from, different books that we read growing up that influence us in one way or another. And that leads to another question, which is probably one of my favorite questions in this segment, which is, the balancing act of the two. So I'll give context for this question, Larson. So a year ago, I had a guest on the show named Eric Bowden, fantasy writer and screenwriter, and we were talking about his series. And when I asked him this question, which originally was, who were the authors and or books that helped inspired you to be the author that you are now? And he gave me the answers to that, but he went a step further. He's told me I can give you all the authors, all the books in the world that I have read. But at the end of the day, when someone picks up my book, I'm not going to be like Brian Sanderson, George R. R. Martin, J.K. Rowling. I'm not going to be like anybody. I'm going to be me because that's what I want my readers to know, that when they pick up my book or the next book that comes after this, they have an idea of my writing style. And he even went further beyond that and said that, as authors, we tend to get pigeonholed into certain styles of writing or certain categories where, like, he's a top fantasy writer, he's a top thriller writer, or romance fantasy, whatever. And, that may work for some authors, but generally speaking, we shouldn't be confined. Here's another example he gave. I'm sure you've seen, Larson, a book that has this tagline, so and so meets so and so. A book that I helped for this one is the Dinosaur Princess series by the late Victor Milan, which is the love child, as one reviewer said, of Jurassic Park, Game of Thrones. I've never read either of those books, but instantly that hooked me in because I was interested, I was invested. However, from an author's point of view, that may not be helpful because that then constrains them into A, one style of writing, B, certain types of characters that have to exist in a story like that, C, the narrative structure, and so forth. So ultimately, Larson, for you as the author, how have you been able to balance these two where, yes, you want to show respect and reverence to the books that you have read growing up who have influenced you, but at the end of the day, on the other side, you want to show your individuality to your readers so that way they can get an understanding of how you approach storytelling in the genre that you are most comfortable in?
So with the hard thing with my books, and I've even asked a lot of my really dedicated readers, I said, what are two comparable, or what are some comparable titles to the book? And the overall answer is, I don't know. And that's one of the beautiful things. They said there are vibes. They say that you have a vibe of A Court of Thorns and Roses because you have Fae in there, but you also have shifters as like your main character. So it's different. And then you have trials. So people are like, oh, Hunger Games or any book with a trial in it. But they're like, but it's a different trial. Like there are no trials in the first book. It's in the second book. So it's an overall like 4-book series of like, you're going through these trials because they're huge. They're not just like, oh, 2 pages and she defeats it. No, they're like huge trials. And then I've also said, like, what I've looked at is I've asked, how do you feel when you're reading these books? Because that's the vibe. Like, what are the feelings? And they say that you get the feeling of Armentrout when you're reading the books because it is descriptive and you do dive into the characters and you have the romance you have with like in the side character love like you do with Sarah J. Maas. And I am honored beyond words to say that because I believe that like the side characters are some of the strongest things that Sarah J. Maas can do in her books. You know, you don't just love the main people, you love everybody. And then looking into it, you know, when people read my books, they say that it's like you're watching a movie when you're reading the book. I've had multiple people write reviews on that saying like you're immersed in it. And that's what I want the experience to have for the readers when they're reading my books. I want it to transport them into a different world while they're reading. Like, you know what the characters look like. You know what all the senses are, taste, smell, touch, everything is in the book and in the chapter in different ways. So you are really immersed within the reading.
Absolutely, 100%. I'm actually glad that you brought that up where, you know, your readers have said that it's not really comparable to one book. I mean, it has certain traits, it has certain features that are similar to another book that may be out there, but it's not exactly a carbon copy of one book or another, which I honestly love. And that just tells me that you know exactly what kind of story you are sharing with your readers. You know exactly the audience you're writing for. So I absolutely love that. And another question, which I wanted to hear your thoughts on, is as you mentioned earlier, that this book falls in the romance fantasy genre, which is probably the most dominant genre of reading in the publishing world. I think it's read more times than any other genre of book. And, you know, some people love romance fantasy. Some people do not like romance fantasy because some have argued that it has overtaken the fantasy genre. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts as the author of this series. Like, would you truly classify your series as like a romance fantasy or a book that has romance in it, but it's not technically a romance fantasy?
So that's a really good question. I mean, it's a character-driven story. So, and the romance is in there, but it is not the main driving force behind the story or the main plot.
Mhm.
It is I guess you could say a subplot behind what else is going on. You know, they're not doing all of this because they're trying to find someone. It just it happens along the. It's a journey that happens along the way. So I would
Right.
classify it as like a fantasy book with a subplot of romance to it, which is still there, and that's because that's personally what I love to read. I'm like, I love a good fantasy book. Aragon was like my go-to when I was a teenager, but as I was older, I was like, hey, what happened with that little elf girl? Like nothing happened there. What's going on? Where's the romance? But it's what he wrote with the beautiful romance of the partnership of a dragon and its rider, which was amazing in a different way to view that. But going into my books, there is a strong romance vibe to it, and there's a strong romance subplot, but it is a fantasy book as there's a bunch of magic inside of it. It's a different world, and they're trying to overcome evil.
Absolutely. And that I love that you brought up Aragon because a lot of my guests I've had on the show have said that that was like probably one of their favorite books growing up. I have not read the book of Aragon. I've only seen the movies, and I know a
No,
lot of people.
no,
Yeah, I knew I was gonna get that
no.
response.
I can't watch that. I watched it because I was like, yes, and then I watched it and I said, nope.
I knew you were going to say it because a lot of people say that that was probably the one movie for a new fantasy book that kind of killed the passion for the continued series of, like, live action books to movies, especially Aragon, especially the sword. A lot of people had complaints that the sword was not like what the author had imagined it to be.
Oh, the sword was fine. The whole like journey was off and the ending was off. The sword was fine. The red
But
sword was fine.
but all these discussions, tying it back in, oh, this is not like this or needs this, that leads another discussion into tropes and trends that should not exist in stories but are sometimes pressured to be put in because that's what's going to sell. So for you, Larson, when you published the first book in the Valdor series, were you a little, actually, let me just rewind back. So before you published the Valdor series, were you conflicted of whether or not you should add, tropes and trends that were popular at the time of when you wanted to publish the Valdor series, because you thought, if I don't have these in there, no one's going to pick up the book?
I didn't know what a trope was when I started writing this and publishing the first book.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know it, and I had no idea what a trope was. I was like, what are people talking about? What is this thing? And they're like, oh, a trope is like a theme. I was like fantasy? And they're like, no, they're like, it's like one horse. I'm like, what the hell? People are riding a horse through the woods. What is this madness? I'm like, I wrote a story. It's okay. Sorry, this is part of my like non-social media side coming out here, but now I'm learning more. I know what tropes are. I know what tropes are now. So
Oh no, I love this, Larson. I absolutely love this.
So I'm able to pick them out now, and the hardest thing was like when I wrote the first book and I already published it, and people were asking what the tropes were, and I was like, what is it? Why don't you read it and tell me? And some of my friends were like, okay, there's found family. I was like, okay, cool. There's one. There's a slow burn romance. There's two. Said like, oh, she's like a strong female main character. I was like, okay, well, I did write that in mind. So I was like, okay, I can see where we're going here. I'm
An FMC, as the term is now used.
As FMC, I was like, what is an MMC? What's an FMC? What are these people?
But this is like all the struggles of, like, how the industry has changed, especially with social media. People saying, like, found family, FMC, MMC.
There's trauma rep in the first book, and I was like, she has to overcome a really traumatic event. So I had no idea trauma rep was a trope, like overcoming fears and finding your inner strength. Like that's in there, but I had no idea it was a trope that people like to read.
Absolutely. And I've talked with a lot of authors on this show about the use of tropes and trends in books, and especially in the publishing industry. A lot of people said that it's not really good in the sense of trying to force tropes into stories that don't necessarily belong. So in your opinion, Larson, are you happy that you didn't have those tropes in the beginning, in the sense that you were writing your book and you needed to have these tropes in there? You were just writing to tell your story because this is an amazing story.
I'm really glad I did. When I begin my journey on the next series or trilogy after this one, I have ideas in mind of how I'd want to how tropes could fit into the story, but not the other way around. Not fitting the story for the tropes, but figuring out how those could, doing it the reverse order to try and to write it, just so it can maybe appeal to a different audience. Enemies to lovers is a huge one that everybody seems to die hard for, and that's honestly a fun one to try and write. And I don't really have that in my book in the first one. I mean, she tries to kill him when she first meets him, but they're not necessarily enemies, but they end up being friends to lovers in a slow burn kind of way. But I always encourage authors to like write your story and then figure out what tropes you want to fit in there. If you're like, a reader and you're saying, oh, I love it when there's just like one bed when they walk into an inn. I'm like, then write it in a scene, but don't base your entire book around that one trope. Just like if it fits in, it fits in. If it doesn't, then there's tons of other ones you can identify that in your writing once you finish writing that draft.
Very true, Larson. And this ultimately leads to a big discussion in the publishing industry, and probably the biggest question I have in this interview. So brace yourself for this, Larson, because this is a big one. So
All
okay, so I've been doing podcasting, interviewing authors for 6 years now, and right now with this interview, that would make it 115 authors that I have interviewed within the last now 2 to 3 years, and it's crazy. And I've talked with a wide range of people. I've talked with teachers, historians, academics, traditional authors, hybrid authors, a lot of indie authors. In fact, more recently, my most recent guest was the youngest author that I've had on the show. She was still in high school. Shout out to Tatum Carrington. She is so incredible. Like, she has a mindset that I have not seen in an author at all. I mean, she even said in her interview that she was getting marketing tips from her teacher of how to market her book. And I was absolutely blown away by, all of this knowledge, by this information, and many more from all the other people. And from what I've come to understand is that in this industry, there are two roads. One is to be an author, the other is to be known as an author, which are two very different mindsets. One's dedicated to the story, the other's dedicated to marketing. And yes, they do have the same end goal. However, for first time authors, what I have noticed and from what I've heard from other authors is that to be known as an author is the road that is the most enticing, but it leads to a lot of unrealistic goals and expectations. And in this industry, which I'm sure you'll definitely agree, Larson, is that this is not a get rich quick money scheme. This is not an industry to make fast money. It is not. And the biggest one of all is that in this industry, there is no guarantee your first book is going to be the start of your legacy. It's the hard truth, but it is the reality. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. There are authors whose first book did give them that status of award-winning authors or a New York Times bestselling list, and that is incredible. All the power to them. But generally speaking, you have these highs and lows because in this industry, like everything else, it's a 50-50 chance. And a lot of authors have said that they have known people who have gone to this industry with the intention of making this their sole source of income, and in less than a few weeks, their passion is dead and they no longer wish to write. As one author said it, their muse had died. So ultimately, Larson, I'm eager to hear your thoughts on this major discussion in this industry. Yes, it is true that you're not going to get the stardom that you want from your first book, but it should not stop you from honing your craft to refine your skills as an author if this is the industry you truly want to be in.
So your books are going to get better the more you write and the more you put it out there. My ratings right now for, my first book, I've got, I reached, this is a big milestone for me. Like, it might not be big for people who are hitting it big, but I published in May, my first book, and I have over 500 ratings on Goodreads with like 2,000 people wanting to read the book. Like, you can see it on your author dashboard.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it's still a rating of over 4. So I'm taking that as a huge accomplishment. And then the second book, I have half the amount of like ratings on there, and it's like a 4.4. So and everyone has said, like they gave it they can see the progress of me as an author. And a couple of my readers that I talked to, they said like, your second book blew me out of the water. Like, I could tell the first one was good. They're like, 4 was good. And then they're like, the second one was a 5. It blew me out of the water. Like, your writing got more confident. You were excelling more. You're exploring different things. And that's what's going to happen as you journey as an author as well. The biggest thing is to, like I said, your writing to share a story. You're not writing to make the money. Like money's nice because then it helps pay you to write the story. But
Yes.
yeah, and like pays for the editor because I'm dyslexic. I typo things all the time. So I love my editor. She fixes all those things for me. and and everything. And it's being known, as an author, and then having your stories, as long as you progress and you grow and people can see who you are and what kind of stories you're writing and the connection you make to it with those readers, they'll stay with you as your journey continues to grow. I'm really happy for my debut novel and my debut series to come out. I mean, are there some minor changes I might have made in the first one? I'm like, sure, like we're all human, but I'm really, really happy with the overall story of where it is, and I'm very proud of it. I think as the series continues, they're just getting better and better. So readers are just going to like keep going along for the ride. And then when I work on the second trilogy that I have, that's actually kind of connected to this one a little bit, I think it's gonna like draw a lot more readers, and it's gonna be really fun to see that journey go on.
Absolutely, 100%. And also to build on that, as authors, you're absolutely right. We should be able to, hone our craft. And as we hone our craft, we get better as time goes on. Grit transforms into talent, as one of my author guests had said not too long ago. And it may be our 10th, maybe our 15th or 20th book that really gets our name out there. And that is fine, because from there you can say, hey, if you've enjoyed book 20, which may be an entirely different book, not connected to the first book at all, you can tell them, check out my other ones and see my growth as an author. And speaking of, growth, one thing that I also found to be very helpful, especially as indie authors, is connections and networking. Because especially on social media, there is a plethora of indie authors, freelance editors, freelance artists to build your own team, which I absolutely love. So, Larson, are there any people you would like to give a personal shout out to who have helped you on your journey in some shape or form?
I'm actually still just starting to build my team and my connections. I didn't know any other indie authors when I started, so I'm fairly new at this. I have done a couple podcasts with Tea and Tropes, and then I have another podcast with Sips with the Surreal coming up in March when I kind of launched the campaign for my third book. Like I said, like Chris from the Ink Pages doing my special edition book for me, like she really was the one to kind of help launch it and get it all the way out there. And then working with Kat and Sharon with Inkspire Promotions, they've done so much for me, along with like all of my readers that I have connected to and kind of made friendships with. Where I'm like, you don't have to like, we just want to talk books, and it's kind of fun. Like Caitlin, I found my beta reader Katie through Book Talk as well. And then her and her sister Carol have they've done AI, but they've done they do their own AI creations, and they've done like character art for my book of their own volition, and like doing their own AI work, which I was like, oh my gosh, like that's pretty cool. Like I have never seen people do that before. So that was amazing. And just kind of going through that, it's been a journey, and I've reached out and I have done 3 author swaps now. That's like when you send your book to someone else and you're reading each other's works. I've worked with K.L. DeVore. She is the author of A Touch of Golden Madness. Rachel Schneider, Metal Singer, that's like hitting the shelves everywhere now. Like I read the ending of her book and I was like, Rachel, what the hell did you do? And she's been like really fun to talk to and like have another author friend. And then another one I just did was K.L. Spear and her book, like a post-apocalyptic, which is different from my genre or like my writing style. So I'm so excited to read that. And her book Bones too. So those are the 3 of the authors that I have been I've reached out to and kind of starting to make those connections with.
Awesome. That's amazing, Larson, that you are building this, team, this community, because, a lot of people tend to think that, the publishing world is a very cutthroat industry. And while there may be some truth to that, at the end of the day, whether you're indie, hybrid, or traditional, we're all in the same boat. We're all trying to get our work out there. So it's beneficial to work with each other to see what works, what doesn't, who's on one person's team and see if we can have them on our team or build our own brand and whatever. And we learn from each other. We learn so many amazing things, which now leads to the final question of this amazing interview, Larson. So I think you may have touched on it earlier, but maybe you can expand upon it. And here is the final question. With everything you've learned thus far from the Valdor series and your unpublished trilogy that you are working on, what is your word of wisdom to fellow authors and writers watching and listening to this interview right now?
It's write what you love, honestly. If you're not, even if you have to take a break and step away, when I wrote A Trial of Fate, I wrote the first 3 chapters and then I deleted it because I said, that's not where I want the story to start. It's okay to go back and change and edit. When I even thought I was done with the first draft of the first book, one of my readers said, like, you need more time in the book for this person to recover from what she went through. And then I took that and I ran with it, and it was the best thing ever. It's also to give yourself grace. You know, you're learning something new. It's okay to make mistakes, and I'd say don't read the bad reviews because everyone's going, but take it with a grain of salt. It's like that person is writing their immediate unfiltered feelings on a platform where they don't think the author is probably going to read it. But as in the authors, like we all do, and we all take it personally, but don't take it personally. It's their freedom to do whatever they want to do. Like, it's your freedom to write your book and have your characters say this or that. Like, just allow them to have their freedom and have that security in yourself to know that what you wrote, you're really happy with. And once you have that established, you're going to have a much healthier pathway to go into this industry and to continue doing what you'd like to do.
Couldn't have said it better than myself, Larson. That is a beautiful and poignant ending to this amazing, now late evening author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to J.E. Larson for making her official debut here on the channel, and hopefully we'll have her back discussing her upcoming trilogy for the next books. Now, J.E., again, thank you so much for coming on the show. And where can people find you on social media to connect and reach out, as well as purchase a copy or two of the Valdor series?
So I'm on Instagram and I'm also on TikTok as well. J.E. Larson _author is where you can find me on Instagram. And I have my website linked to my profile page on both. On TikTok, it's just J.E. Larson. Haha, I snagged the first the first handle there. And links to my website. I sell signed copies if you'd like a signed copy, or you can find it on Amazon, or if you're like, I just want to test out the waters and see how things are going. They're available on KU. I really appreciate Kindle Unlimited and its ability to reach a lot of different people. For anyone who's just trying to, I'm not into fantasy, I don't know if I want to try it. Like, if you don't like it, just try it. That's what KU is for. And I think it's a really great tool to have people read as many stories as they want to without having to pay a lot. And it's totally fine. Like, authors get royalties from it. We're okay.
Yes, absolutely.
You have KU, you download this, you try it out.
Exactly what Larson said.
You flip through the whole book. You flip the whole way, because then we get all the royalties for it, and you don't have to pay anything.
Oh man, I needed that. I absolutely needed that. Thank you, Larson, for that. I will link all that down below in the description of this video. And one final thing, viewers and listeners, if you've been following me on social media and you know about Audio Mazes, a huge announcement. We'll be making 2 big posts this week, so be on the lookout for that. I'll be linking the website down below to check out Audio Mazes, as well as if you wish to pre-order a immersive narrative book, I highly encourage it, as well as join our membership program, as well as a collector's box. I don't want to give too much away, but the collector's box has a lot of neat things that are tailor-made to the stories. So if you want to learn more about Audio Mazes, click on the link down below. And as always, thank you everyone for joining us for another author interview here on the show. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, I will see you all in the next episode. So until then, have a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, or wherever you are in the world.